He thought humiliating her would be easy, but the moment she stepped through those dojo doors, he had already made a mistake he wouldn't understand until it was too late. The late afternoon sun stretched across the polished wooden floor as Amanda Carter walked in quietly, her worn sneakers barely making a sound, her faded yellow belt tied with simple precision. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention, and yet somehow it drew it anyway. Conversation slowed. A few black belts paused mid-stretch, their eyes scanning her with thinly veiled judgment. Brad Hoffman, the head instructor, stood near the center of the mat with arms crossed. His crisp uniform, an embroidered black belt marking authority that filled the room before he even spoke. He glanced at her once, then again, longer this time, measuring, dismissing, deciding. This wasn't someone he took seriously. Not in a place like this where discipline was earned and respect was fought for. "You here for the beginner class," he called out, his voice carrying just enough edge to make a few students smirk. Amanda stopped a few feet from the mat, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. "I'm here to train," she replied softly, her voice steady but not defensive. That alone earned a quiet chuckle from somewhere near the back wall. Brad tilted his head slightly, amused now. "Train," he repeated, as if testing the word for humor. Carlos Rivera stepped forward beside him, arms folded, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You might want to start with something lighter," Carlos added, his tone smooth but patronizing. "This class isn't exactly casual." A few students exchanged looks, the kind that said they'd seen this before. Someone walks in, overestimates themselves, gets humbled. Lesson learned. Amanda nodded once, slow and polite, as if she'd heard the same words many times before. She stepped closer to the edge of the mat, her eyes briefly scanning the room. Not nervously, not uncertain, just observant. Brad noticed that, and for a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his expression, but it vanished just as quickly as it came, replaced again by that confident, almost bored authority. "Tell you what," he said, stepping forward, his voice louder now so the entire class could hear. "You can watch today, see how things actually work here." A ripple of quiet laughter followed, not cruel enough to be called out, but sharp enough to sting. Amanda didn't react, not outwardly. Her hands rested loosely at her sides, her breathing calm, controlled, almost too controlled. The room settled into that strange tension where something unspoken lingered in the air. One of the younger students shifted uncomfortably, sensing it, though he couldn't explain why. Brad gestured toward the bench against the wall, already turning away as if the conversation was finished, as if she had already been placed in her role. Outsider, observer, not a participant, not a threat. And that was the moment everything quietly locked into place, because Amanda didn't move to the bench, she didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She simply took one step forward onto the mat, just one, slow and deliberate. And for reasons no one in that room could yet understand, the energy changed, subtle, almost invisible, but undeniable, like the air before a storm. And though Brad hadn't realized it yet, the balance in that room had already begun to shift. Brad stopped mid-step when he noticed she had not moved to the bench, his eyes narrowing slightly as he turned back, the faint echo of sneakers on polished wood drawing attention from every corner of the room. Amanda stood on the edge of the mat now, not in defiance, not in challenge, just present, steady, as if she had always belonged there. The quiet confidence in her posture did not match the faded belt tied at her waist, and that contradiction unsettled more than a few watching eyes. Carlos let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he glanced at the others. "Did you not hear him?" he said, his tone light, but edged with mockery. "Observation only." A few students chuckled again, though softer this time, less certain. Amanda's gaze lifted slightly, meeting Brad's for the first time, and there was no hesitation there, no apology, just calm awareness, the kind that does not ask for permission. Brad felt it, even if he could not name it, and something in him resisted backing down. Not here, not in front of his class. "You think this is a game," he said, stepping closer, his voice carrying across the room. "People train here for years before they even understand the basics." Amanda gave a small nod, as if acknowledging the truth in his words, which only seemed to irritate him more, because she was not arguing, not reacting the way he expected. "Then let me learn," she said quietly, And the simplicity of that response landed heavier than any protest could have. A brief silence followed, thin and stretched, before Carlos stepped in again, eager to reclaim the tone. "Learning starts with knowing your place," he said, folding his arms tighter. "And right now, that is not out here." Another ripple of agreement moved through the group, but it lacked the earlier confidence. There was hesitation now, subtle but growing. One of the younger students shifted his weight, glancing between Amanda and the instructors as if sensing something was off script. Brad exhaled slowly, making a decision, the kind that felt small in the moment but would echo later. "Fine," he said, his voice sharp with controlled authority. "You want to be on the mat, then you follow the rules." He gestured toward the open space. Basic positioning, nothing more. Do not overstep. It sounded like permission, but it was not. It was a setup, a controlled demonstration meant to remind her, and everyone else, exactly where she stood. Amanda stepped forward without hesitation, her movements measured, unhurried. She took her place exactly where he indicated, no more, no less. Her hands relaxed, her shoulders loose, her breathing even. Too even. Carlos exchanged a quick glance with Brad, something unspoken passing between them, a shared understanding that this would be quick, instructional, forgettable. "Watch closely," Brad announced to the class, turning slightly so all eyes remained on them. "This is how control is established from the start." He reached out, demonstrating a standard position, expecting compliance, expecting uncertainty, expecting the slight awkwardness of someone out of their depth. But Amanda did not mirror confusion. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. She simply adjusted, small, precise, almost imperceptible shifts that aligned her stance with quiet accuracy, and for a split second, Brad paused, just enough to notice that something was not matching his expectations, not yet enough to understand why. The room grew quieter, not because anyone asked it to, but because something had changed, something subtle and undeniable, like a rhythm slipping out of sync, and though no one said it out loud, the same thought flickered through several minds at once. This was not unfolding the way it was supposed to. Brad felt it before he understood it, that slight resistance in the air, like something refusing to follow the script he had written in his head. His hand still extended from the demonstration as he studied Amanda more carefully now, not as a distraction, but as a variable he had misjudged. "Relax your stance," he said, his tone sharper than before, correcting what he assumed was beginner tension. But Amanda did not flinch, did not adjust unnecessarily. She simply held position with quiet precision, the kind that does not come from guessing, the kind that comes from knowing. Carlos shifted beside them, his earlier grin fading into something tighter, less certain. "You are overthinking it," he added quickly, stepping in to reinforce control. But even as he spoke, his eyes flicked to her feet, noticing how balanced she was, how nothing seemed wasted in her posture, a detail most beginners never get right. Not this early, not this naturally. The students along the wall had gone still, their earlier amusement replaced by curiosity. The room no longer felt like a stage for a simple lesson. It felt like something else was unfolding, something unscripted. Brad circled slightly, testing angles under the pretense of instruction. "Here," he said, repositioning his own stance to demonstrate spacing. "This is where you would lose control." He expected hesitation, a delayed reaction, some visible uncertainty. But Amanda adjusted in one smooth motion, subtle, efficient, almost invisible, aligning herself without overcompensating, without breaking rhythm. And that was when the first real crack appeared, not in her, but in him, because for a brief second, Brad hesitated, not outwardly, but enough for Carlos to notice, enough for the energy in the room to shift again. "Beginner's luck," Carlos muttered under his breath, though it sounded less like confidence and more like reassurance for himself. Brad straightened slightly, regaining composure. "Fine," he said, louder now, addressing the class as much as her. "Let us add a little movement." It was still framed as instruction, still controlled, still safe, but the edge was there now, a need to reassert dominance, to bring things back into alignment. Amanda gave a small nod, her expression unchanged, calm, patient, almost detached, as if she had already accepted whatever came next, and that calm was what unsettled him most, because it did not react to pressure. It absorbed it, redirected it. The kind of composure that is built over time, not learned in a few casual classes. Brad stepped forward again, initiating the next demonstration, slower this time, more deliberate, watching her closely, waiting for the moment she would fall out of sync, the moment the illusion would break. But it did not come. Instead, every movement she made remained measured, controlled, and unexpectedly precise, not exaggerated, not showy, just correct in a way that quietly challenged everything he had assumed about her. A faint murmur rippled through the students, quickly silenced, but impossible to ignore, because now they were no longer watching a lesson. They were watching a question unfold, and no one in that room yet had the answer, except perhaps Amanda, who stood there with the same steady gaze, as if she had seen this moment long before any of them realized it was happening. The air had changed completely now, not in a way that could be explained out loud, but in the way every person in that room instinctively felt it, the kind of shift that makes laughter disappear before anyone realizes why. Brad took a slow breath, steadying himself, his voice controlled but firmer than before. "All right, enough basics," he said, turning slightly so the class could still see. "Let us see how you handle pressure." It sounded like instruction, but there was intent behind it now. A quiet need to re-establish order. Carlos stepped back half a step, giving space but watching closely, his earlier confidence replaced with something sharper, more alert. Amanda did not move until Brad did, her eyes tracking him calmly, not reacting, not anticipating too soon, just present. And that presence unsettled him more than any mistake would have, because mistakes are predictable, they confirm expectations. But this was different. Brad moved forward with controlled speed, demonstrating a sequence meant to guide and test at the same time, something any beginner would struggle to follow. But Amanda responded without hesitation, not faster, not stronger, just aligned, each adjustment small, efficient, almost quiet, as if she was not reacting to him, but moving with something he could not see. The room grew still again, deeper this time. Even the faint sounds of movement along the walls faded. One of the younger students leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed, sensing something important without understanding what it was. Carlos frowned, stepping to the side to get a better angle, his gaze dropping briefly to Amanda's footwork, then rising again, his expression tightening as a realization began forming. Brad increased the complexity, adding another layer, subtle but intentional, waiting for the break, waiting for her rhythm to slip, but it did not happen. Instead, she remained steady, composed, her breathing even, her posture grounded, nothing wasted, nothing rushed. And then it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough that everyone saw it at the same time. Brad paused, just for a fraction of a second, just enough for the entire room to notice that he was no longer leading as confidently as before. It was a small hesitation, but in a place like this, it meant everything. A faint murmur tried to rise but died instantly, swallowed by the weight of what they were witnessing. Amanda did not capitalize on it, did not push forward. She simply remained where she was, calm, controlled, as if the moment itself was enough, as if she had nothing to prove, and that was what made it undeniable. Because she was not trying to impress anyone. She was not reacting to the pressure. She was existing above it. Carlos straightened slowly, his arms no longer folded, his posture more attentive now. "Where did you train?" he asked suddenly. The first real question, not a mockery, not a challenge, but something closer to caution. Amanda glanced at him briefly, then back at Brad, her expression unchanged. "A long time ago," she said, her voice quiet but certain. And that answer hung in the air longer than any explanation could have, because it did not satisfy curiosity. It deepened it. Brad exhaled, a subtle shift in his stance betraying the fact that he now understood something he had not before. This was not a beginner stepping into unfamiliar territory. This was someone who had simply chosen not to reveal everything at once. And for the first time since she walked through that door, the balance in that room was no longer his to control. The silence did not break, it deepened, stretching across the dojo like a held breath no one dared release. Brad lowered his hands slowly, no longer pretending this was just another controlled demonstration. His eyes locked on Amanda now, not with dismissal, not with amusement, but with something far more careful, measured. Almost cautious, he took a small step back, subtle but visible, and in that single movement, the entire room understood what had just shifted. Carlos noticed it too, his jaw tightening slightly as he glanced at Brad, then back at Amanda, recalculating everything he thought he knew. You said you trained a long time ago. Carlos spoke again, this time his voice quieter, stripped of its earlier edge. How long? Amanda adjusted her sleeve lightly, a simple gesture that carried no urgency, no need to impress. Long enough to learn when not to speak, she replied, her tone calm, almost reflective, and that answer landed heavier than anything else she had said so far, because it explained everything without revealing anything. A few students exchanged glances, the kind that said they were witnessing something rare, something that would be talked about long after the class ended. Brad straightened his posture, regaining some of his authority, but it was different now, less about control and more about understanding. All right, he said, his voice steady, but no longer condescending. Show us. It was not a command this time, not a trap. It was an invitation, and everyone in that room felt the difference instantly. Amanda did not move right away, not because she hesitated, but because she chose her moment, her eyes briefly scanning the space, the students, the instructors, the tension that had built from the moment she walked in. Then she stepped forward, one smooth, deliberate motion, her posture aligning naturally, her breathing steady. Everything about her movement quiet yet undeniable. There was no performance in it, no attempt to impress, just clarity, precision, control. Brad watched closely now, fully attentive, every assumption he had made earlier dissolving piece by piece. Carlos leaned slightly forward, no longer relaxed, no longer certain, just focused, waiting. The room fell into complete stillness. Even the smallest sounds seemed to fade away, as if the space itself understood that something important was about to happen. Amanda raised her hands calmly, not aggressively, not defensively, simply prepared, and in that moment, the difference became undeniable, because she was not reacting to the room anymore. The room was reacting to her, and for the first time since she stepped onto that mat, no one was looking at her as an outsider. They were looking at her as the center of everything unfolding. And Brad, standing just a few feet away, realized something that no amount of experience could have prepared him for. This was not about proving a point anymore. This was about witnessing something he had completely failed to recognize. And as Amanda took one final, steady breath, the entire dojo seemed to pause with her, waiting for what would come next. For a moment, nothing happened, and that nothing carried more weight than any action could have. Amanda stood still, her breathing slow and controlled, her eyes steady, not locked on Brad but aware of everything around her, the room, the distance, the tension. It was as if she was not preparing to act, but simply allowing the moment to settle into place. Brad shifted his stance slightly, no longer leading, no longer certain of what would come next, his earlier confidence replaced by a quiet alertness, the kind that comes when you realize you are no longer in control of the outcome. Whenever you are ready, he said, his voice lower now, more respectful than before, and that alone caused a subtle ripple through the students, because they had never heard that tone from him directed at someone like her. Amanda gave the smallest nod, then moved, not fast, not dramatic, just precise, one step, measured, balanced, her posture aligning with effortless control. Brad responded, instinctively, but for the first time, he was reacting, not guiding, and that difference, though subtle, was undeniable to anyone watching closely. Amanda's movements remained minimal, no wasted motion, no unnecessary force, just clean transitions that seemed almost effortless, like she had done this countless times before. Carlos leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he followed each adjustment, trying to understand, trying to find the flaw, but there was none, not in the way he expected. Because what she demonstrated was not about overpowering or proving dominance. It was about control, timing, awareness, the kind of mastery that does not need to announce itself. Brad paused again, this time longer, just enough for the entire room to feel it, that brief moment where the flow stopped, where he realized he could not predict her next move, and that was the moment everything became clear, not just to him, but to everyone watching. Amanda was not catching up, she was setting the pace. And she had been from the very beginning. A quiet murmur almost formed but never fully emerged, held back by the weight of realization spreading through the room. Amanda stepped back just as calmly as she had stepped forward, resetting her stance without urgency, without display, as if the demonstration had already said everything it needed to say. Brad lowered his hands completely now, no longer attempting to continue, no longer framing this as a lesson. He looked at her differently, not as a student, not as a beginner, but as someone he had completely misread. Carlos straightened slowly, his arms no longer crossed, his expression serious now, stripped of the earlier arrogance. One of the younger students exhaled quietly, not even realizing he had been holding his breath, and in that shared silence, the truth settled over the entire dojo. This had never been about a simple demonstration. It had been a quiet revelation unfolding in real time. Amanda adjusted her belt lightly, the same simple motion she had made when she first stepped in, and yet now it carried an entirely different meaning, because everyone in that room understood something they had not before. Strength does not always arrive loudly, and the most dangerous mistake is assuming you can recognize it on sight. And as Amanda lifted her gaze once more, calm and unwavering, the question no one dared to ask lingered in the air. Just how much had she been holding back all along? No one spoke, not even the students who had laughed earlier, because something far more powerful than embarrassment had taken hold of the room. It was recognition, slow and undeniable. Brad stood still for a second longer than necessary, his gaze fixed on Amanda, as if trying to reconcile what he had just witnessed with everything he believed about skill, rank, and authority. Then he did something no one in that dojo had ever seen him do before. He stepped aside, not dramatically, not with words. Just a quiet shift that opened space. And in that small gesture, the hierarchy that had defined the room only minutes ago loosened its grip. Carlos noticed it immediately, his expression tightening as he realized what that movement meant, the unspoken acknowledgement that control had changed hands. Even if only for a moment, Amanda did not react to it. She did not take advantage of the space or fill it with presence. She simply remained where she was, calm, composed, as if none of this surprised her, as if she had seen this pattern unfold before. You could have said something. Carlos finally broke the silence, his voice lower now, less confrontational, more searching. Amanda glanced at him briefly, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. Would it have changed anything? She replied, and the question landed harder than any accusation, because everyone in that room knew the answer. Brad exhaled slowly, a quiet admission that he had misjudged more than just her skill. He had misjudged her entirely. No, he said, almost to himself, the word barely above a whisper. One of the younger students shifted again, this time stepping slightly closer, curiosity overcoming hesitation. The atmosphere had shifted from tension to something else now, something reflective, almost humbling. Amanda adjusted her stance slightly, not to prepare for anything, but simply to settle back into stillness, her movements returning to the same quiet neutrality she had carried when she first walked in, and that contrast, from overlooked to undeniable, settled over the room like a lesson no one had planned to learn. Carlos rubbed the back of his neck, glancing around at the students who were now watching with completely different eyes, no longer amused, no longer dismissive, but attentive, respectful. So what now? He asked, the question directed at Brad but carrying a weight that extended beyond instruction. Brad looked at Amanda again, then at the class, and for the first time, he did not rush to answer. Because whatever came next would not be about reasserting control, it would be about acknowledging truth, and truth does not move on command. Amanda took a small step back, giving space again, not claiming it, not holding on to it, just releasing it as quietly as she had taken it. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that what they had witnessed was not a challenge, not a confrontation, but a quiet correction, the kind that does not need to be announced to be understood. And as the silence settled once more, deeper and more meaningful than before, one realization echoed through the room, without a single word being spoken. They had all been looking in the wrong direction from the very beginning. The silence no longer felt uncertain. It felt earned, like something the room itself had settled into after being forced to reconsider everything it thought it understood. Brad took a slow step forward again, but this time there was No trace of authority in the movement. Only intention, measured and deliberate. "Class," he said, his voice steady but different now, quieter in a way that demanded more attention than volume ever could. "What you just saw was not about strength." He paused briefly, searching for the right words, not to explain it away, but to acknowledge it properly. It was about control. No one moved. No one even shifted. Because every student knew this was not part of the usual routine. Carlos nodded slightly, his earlier confidence replaced with a kind of respect that had not been there before. He looked at Amanda again, not as an outsider, not as a disruption, but as someone who had just revealed a level of understanding they had failed to recognize. Amanda remained calm, her posture relaxed, her presence no longer questioned, simply accepted. One of the younger students raised his hand halfway, then lowered it again, unsure if speaking would break something important. Brad noticed, and, for the first time, he allowed space instead of controlling it. "If you have questions, ask them," he said, and the invitation felt genuine, not performative. The student hesitated, then spoke. How did she stay so calm? His voice carried a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Amanda turned her gaze slightly toward him, not sharply, just enough to acknowledge the question. "Calm is not something you turn on," she said softly. "It is something you build when no one is watching." The room absorbed that in silence, the kind that lingers because it feels true. Carlos exhaled quietly, shaking his head once as if letting go of something he had been holding on to. "We were watching the wrong things," he admitted, not loudly, but clearly enough for everyone to hear. Brad gave a small nod in agreement, a subtle acknowledgement that extended beyond the moment. Amanda stepped back another half step, returning fully to neutral space, not claiming attention, not holding on to the shift she had created. And that made the impact even stronger, because it was never about taking control, it was about revealing it. The students began to straighten, not out of habit, but out of awareness, their posture reflecting a quiet respect that had not been present earlier. Brad glanced around the room, then back at Amanda, and for a brief second, there was something like humility in his expression, something rarely seen in a place built on discipline and hierarchy. "We continue," he said finally, but the words carried a different meaning now, not just a continuation of training, but a continuation of understanding. Amanda gave a small nod, her expression unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, and that was the final realization that settled over the room. The most powerful presence is often the one that never tries to prove itself, and as the class slowly returned to motion, the earlier laughter, the earlier judgment, felt distant, almost unreal, replaced by something far more lasting. The quiet awareness that they had all just witnessed something they would not forget. The class moved again, but nothing felt the same. Every step carried a new awareness. Every glance held a quiet recognition that something fundamental had shifted. Amanda blended back into the line without effort, without ceremony, as if she had never stood at the center of it all. And that was what stayed with them the most. Not what she had shown, but how easily she stepped away from it. Brad watched her for a moment longer than necessary, then turned his attention back to the group, his voice steady, but no longer sharp. Again, he instructed, and this time the word carried purpose instead of authority. The students followed, but their focus had changed. They were no longer trying to impress, no longer trying to prove anything. They were observing, adjusting, learning in a way that felt deeper than before. Carlos moved through the line, correcting posture, but even his tone had softened, more precise, less dismissive, as if he too had recalibrated what mattered. One of the younger students hesitated, then approached Amanda during a brief pause. "Can you show me how you did that adjustment?" he asked, his voice respectful, not casual. Amanda looked at him, then nodded once, stepping slightly aside to give space. Her explanation was simple, direct, without unnecessary detail, and yet it carried a clarity that made the movement easier to understand, not because it was explained better, but because it came from experience. The student followed, slowly at first, then more confidently, and for the first time, there was no laughter, no judgment, only attention. Brad noticed from across the room, his expression thoughtful, not threatened, not defensive, just aware, the kind of awareness that comes when something challenges your assumptions without tearing them down. He stepped closer, not to interrupt, but to observe. Amanda finished the explanation and stepped back again, returning the focus to the student, not holding on to it, not claiming any position beyond what was necessary. And that quiet restraint spoke louder than anything else. The class continued, but now it carried a different rhythm, one built on respect rather than hierarchy, understanding rather than assumption. And as the final minutes passed, the earlier tension felt like something distant, almost unreal. When the session ended, no one rushed out immediately. A few students lingered, exchanging quiet comments, glancing toward Amanda with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Carlos approached Brad, his voice low. "We almost missed it," he said, and Brad gave a small nod. "We did," he replied, no denial, no excuse, just acknowledgement, across the room. Amanda adjusted her belt one last time, the same simple motion that had gone unnoticed when she first walked in, but now carried a completely different weight. She picked up her bag, her movements as calm and unremarkable as before, and as she walked toward the door, the room seemed to follow her in silence, not because they had to, but because something in them understood what they had just witnessed. She paused briefly at the entrance, not turning back, not making a statement, just a moment of stillness before stepping out into the fading light. And behind her, in a room that had been built on discipline and rank, a quieter lesson remained, one that no one would say out loud, but no one would forget. That true strength does not demand to be seen. It simply reveals itself when the moment calls for it.